or so ago it was kind of pushed along by Marion Burns, who was a retired school teacher, very strong environmentalist and advocate in the area, a legend, in a lot of ways. I mean, she was really one of the first people that really was excellent at organizing and doing what needed to be done, to change the whole Calumet area around from what used to be pretty much a dumping ground with all the landfills, a lot of fly-by-night chemical companies that would just, leave their waste behind, go bankrupt and disappear. Well, Marion pretty much, organized the communities around here, developed a lot of local leadership. Tom, has kind of evolved out of that. Southeast Environmental Task Force, Calumet Heritage Partnership. This is one of the most actively organized areas for environmental and open space reasons anywhere in the whole Chicago metropolitan area. And it goes back to Marion. And then Jim Landing was a professor at the University of Illinois Circle campus, who in a lot of ways was Marion's technical advisor, talking about how important the bird life was out here. So they were the original ones who really put a focus on this area. So there were, as Tom mentioned, this is an area that is heavily industrialized starting around the 1880s and with active industry, back up into the 1980s. Much of that has disappeared now, but there was a legacy of waste left behind. So when you look at all of the properties in this area, there's going to be some type of waste. There's going to be heavy metals, there's going to be some petrochemicals. And that's expected. Irregardless of that, the Chicago Park District, Chicago Forest Preserve District have gotten involved and they've acquired every one of the open space parcels that were listed as important primarily because of bird habitat, a little bit of prairie and savanna remnants. Every one of those parcels has been acquired now over the last 15 to 20 years. So it's a great success story, except for one. And the core parcel, kind of, the keystone parcel that the community around here for decades now has been pushing to preserve is the Lake Calumet property, the Port Authority property. When the Port Authority was created back in the late 50s, early 1960s, there was this vision that this would be a great inland seaport. And it was a good vision. But that's back when the lake freighters were much smaller than the freighters that we have today. The peninsulas that were built out by landfill into the lake, were designed for 1950s, 1960s shipping. The Port Authority, never was able to really lease out properties or get the grants to really develop this as an inland port. And what happened was most historic industry was on the Calumet River. And this is a long way, we're talking about 3-4 miles before you get to Lake Michigan. So it takes tugboats pushing these lake freighters, a good full day to even get down to the south end of the lake. That's just not sensible or economic in today's world. So this failed as a port. The Port Authority also has what's called Iroquois Landing right at the mouth of the Calumet River. That never developed. The Port Authority really, ended up leasing some of its properties to these fly-by-night chemical companies that disappeared after a few years and left a legacy of pollution right here on the property. So there's a lot of liabilities that the Port Authority ended up accumulating over the decades. A lot of the seawalls now are deteriorating. The seawall right along Iroquois Landing is substantially deteriorated. So it's just not a place where big shipping is going to occur. The other issue is that, if you're going to bring in any type of shipping into the lake, you have to dredge a depth into the lake. And there was an attempt about 15 years ago where a 10 to 15 foot channel right up the middle was dredged because the Port Authority was going to propose a 1,000-boat marina at the north end of the lake. Mayor Daley put the kibosh on that marina almost at the 11th hour. It never developed. The channel was dug, and half of what we call the hammerhead at the top end of the lake, half of that hammerhead was dredged out to about 10 feet deep. but the other half of the hammerhead is only 2 or 3 feet deep. When you get out by the lake, and what you're looking at behind you is not the lake. What you're looking at behind you is a old wetland mitigation bank that was required when the Port Authority was filling in parts of the lake, developing the golf course. The Army Corps required that some wetlands be set aside. So this 140-acre lake right behind you used to be part of Lake Calumet, just like the landfills here at one point were part of Lake Calumet. You know, all of this landscape's been filled in. This lake behind us was left behind. There was an attempt to put in wetland edges and plants. That failed again too, but there's a dike that you can barely see off in the distance that's separating this 140-acre mitigation lake from the real, what's left of Lake Calumet itself, which is enormous in comparison to what we're looking at out the window here. So because there was a minor channel dug up the middle, most of the rest of the lake is very shallow. This large bay on the west side was only about 1 foot deep. You could barely even get a john boat into there. Lake Michigan now has come up 1 foot, so now it's about 2 feet deep.
Yeah.
But this end of the hammerhead and this end of the bay here, you know, our hope would be that if the Port Authority property could be acquired by probably a large agency like Chicago Park District or the Cook County Forest Preserve District, those are our two hopes, that the federal government has what's called the Great Lakes Restoration Initiative Fund, hundreds of millions of dollars for habitat restoration in the Great Lakes Basin. So if we had an open space agency that actually controlled the property, they could immediately apply for that federal funding to do major habitat restoration. So what we're hoping is that this whole West Bay and part of the hammerhead could really be restored as what's called a hemi-marsh, where we have a lot of emergent vegetation coming up in the middle of open water. That's what's been lost in this area. That's something Walter has been studying with Audubon here for the last few years. The bird colonies have collapsed in the region, and it's because we've lost this mix of emergent vegetation in the middle of open water. And this is a perfect place to put it, and this is a perfect place to put it. But we're not going to get the Park District or the Forest Preserve District interested in acquiring this property just as a large restoration. There has to be a people component to it. So the large peninsula that we'll be visiting today is about a 100-acre peninsula, and that's where most of the activity, public activity, would occur, with picnic grounds, fishing, small boat, kayak access, small sailboats. I mean, we have all kind of ideas of what could be done here. And that would probably be primarily on the west end of the hammerhead, which is still a pretty large body of water, and there would still be significantly more of the lake set aside for bird habitat. The city, with these old peninsulas that just aren't good for anything anymore, you can't really use them for anything that's a productive industrial use, at some point we'll probably want to fill in the slips of water and create a large contiguous piece of property that would be developable. Again, that's not cheap. You know, the Port Authority just doesn't have the money to make these investments. The Port Authority has old debts, they have a lot of infrastructure, tens of millions of dollars to repair that they need to their seawalls. So they're so far behind in debt that what we're hoping is that if the Park District or Forest Preserve District could make an offer for the north end of their land, which isn't being used and hasn't been used in the 50 years since they were created, that at least we could begin doing something with the north end of their property while they figure out, you know, for the next 10 or 20 years how they're ever going to develop the remainder of their property. And the area hopes that they do develop it. I mean, it's very important in the Calumet area that we bring in jobs. But there are a lot of brownfields in this area that are ready to go for industrial development that are undoubtedly going to be the first place that industrial redevelopment occurs. The Port Authority's got a long time before they can get their land prepared for any type of industrial attraction, and that's the kind of catch-22 we're in right now.